All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and I'm very glad that you found this program. I want to give a special shout out to, by the way, for those who are tooting our horn and helping others know that this program exists. And yes, not all of those people doing so are of a supportive nature. Doesn't matter, though. I appreciate you helping get the word out so that people can, tune in and find out for themselves if what we're talking about here is worthwhile. I hope you enjoy what I have in store for you today, because we're going to explore why there's such a curious soft spot on the part of many within the media, both here in Idaho as well as elsewhere in the country, when it comes to communism. And such a sour note, or at least a distaste that seems to come through whenever the subject is freedom. So we're going to start with a headline. This is actually from, I believe it's the Idaho Tribune.org. A communist fist, giant communist fist, to be erected in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Controversial art gains unanimous support from Arts Commission. Now, I got to point out here, in reading this article, my first impression was, okay, Idaho Tribune is not part of the mainstream media, because they're taking a pretty hard stand here and saying, why on earth are taxpayer dollars being spent to put up a communist piece of art in Coeur d'Alene? And so after zero debate, the Coeur d'Alene Arts Commission voted in support of erecting a giant communist fist statue. That artwork will likely be paid for using local tax dollars. Now, this is what it looks like. These are the words of artist Rick Davis, who says, I was inspired to create this piece because I find it to be powerful, contemporary, an historic symbol of solidarity with those who struggle for human rights and stand with marginalized groups. Okay, I'm sorry, but when I think about human rights and I think about, standing up for the oppressed, communism never seems to be one of the ideologies that I would equate with that. Now, creating oppressed people, creating people who are desperately in need of rescue, yeah, I would associate communism with this. But, it's contemporary. And apparently that means that this is an idea which is spreading very rapidly through our society. And by the way, this is not the first piece of communist art that apparently the Coeur d'Alene Arts Council has put together. Check this out. This was a communist piece of art titled Marker 11. And I want you to hear the reaction here that Jennifer Drake, who is a member of this Arts Commission, had when people pushed back against this communist hammer and sickle titled Marker 11. Drake's response to public outcry from Coeur d'Alene residents who were genuinely shocked by the communist art lacked any semblance of remorse. What I would call the official response to this situation has been nothing short of disrespectful, said Drake, after the city of Coeur d'Alene moved the piece. Disrespectful not just to me, but all the other arts commissioners. Okay, so apparently the arts commissioners are, they're trying to get some diversity out there, trying to expand our horizons, but they do not like being questioned, which seems pretty rigid. I mean, come on, are you guys free thinkers or not? Free thinkers, as long as everybody agrees with you perfectly. Okay, well, at least we're clear on that. But I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to see the discussion that took place as this art commission was trying to bring a vote to pass on what to do with this clenched fist of solidarity. And it's very instructive the way that they talk about this. Check it out.
It's going to be really it would be very nice.
But do you think the symbol of the clenched fist would be controversial?
Probably, but
I mean, to the point that we'd have to take it away?
no.
Violence.
It's going to be the same handful of people who complain about it, and then it's going to be.
Yeah. Mayor.
Yeah, it's definitely
For mayor, no.
a statement, but an important and good statement.
It's controversial.
It's just the way life is.
Yeah, let's hope that doesn't trouble was the communist guy.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you to everybody on that select committee.
Equality and diverse group of art here, and wow, this is so exciting, and it's controversial, but that's just the way it's supposed to be, and it'll probably be the same usual people who complain about it. And look, I want to make clear, I'm not suggesting that you should go around looking for reasons to go complain or to otherwise be upset about things. We all know people who are like that, and frankly, they're not pleasant people to be around. It's not a very healthy or productive way to live your life. But I think it's fair to ask, why this soft spot for communism? Why is it that statues that bear the likeness of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson have to be torn down in some locales because, well, after all, we know that these guys were part of a slave-owning generation, and therefore we need to make sure that their image isn't even so much as seen. And by the way, if you go and tour Monticello, or is it Monticello? Anyway, Jefferson's home in Virginia, you will find that history has been drastically rewritten or reimagined, I guess I should say, to be mostly about the slaves and the slave quarters and the slave this and the slave that, and very little about Jefferson himself. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to exclude one or the other, but that's kind of the way things are going. So with this rewriting of history, and we have to get rid of statues, we have to rename streets, we have to purge ourselves of all these vestiges of things that remind us of the terrible, terrible wrong, and slavery was a terrible wrong. But communism, really? That's somehow innocent, or it's good, or it's noble, or it's controversial and provocative? Let's take a little bit closer look. And we'll do it by the numbers. So, this should hopefully put a little bit of context into why it might be a wise thing to question having these communist symbols celebrated openly and even though we know it's going to make some people upset. So I want to rely on Walter Williams to bring some gravity to the situation, as well as just some common sense. He points out the 20th century was mankind's most brutal century. Roughly 16 million people lost their lives during World War I. About 60 million died during World War II. Wars during the 20th century cost an estimated 71 million to 116 million lives. That is incredible. And yet, your jaw is going to drop when you hear the next numbers. The number of war dead pales in comparison with the number of people who lost their lives at the hands of their own governments. The late Professor R.J. Rummel of the University of Hawaii documented this tragedy in his book, Death by Government, Genocide and Mass Murder Since 1900. In fact, he actually coined a word which you don't hear used very often, but it's called democide, and it means death by government. And I want you to keep this in mind, because I'm going to bring this all back around here in a few minutes about, for all the hyperfixation we have right now, all these violent extremists, January 6th, and extremists out there who doubt the elections and doubt what we tell them about COVID. And, oh, man, it's all conspiracy theory. Believe me, there's a reason to be very careful about governments that have no effective check on their power versus, kooks. And yes, there are some kooks out there. But check this out. Let's talk a little bit about the numbers in terms of death by government. The People's Republic of China tops the list, 76 million lives lost at the hands of government between 1949 and 1987. How about the Soviet Union? 62 million lives lost from 1917 to 1987. Look at this. Adolf Hitler's Nazi German government killed 21 million people between 1933 and 1945. But he's in a very distant third place here. And yet, no one would be clamoring to put up a swastika, or nobody would be clamoring to, put up some kind of other iconography that would be associated with Nazism. So why do we give such a soft spot to a communism? Do I need to point this out? The top two killers historically, governments that killed their own people. This is not war. This is systematic elimination of people. They identified targeted populations. They disarmed them by law, generally, and either starved them or otherwise liquidated them by the tens of millions. It was communism. That was the form of government for both the People's Republic of China as well as the Soviet Union. And of course, you have lesser murdering regimes like Nationalist China, Japan, Turkey, Vietnam, Mexico. Get out a few more: Ethiopia, Peru, Cambodia, another communist one that put a few million people, in an early grave. See, according to R.J. Rummel's research, the 20th century saw 262 million people's lives lost at the hands of their own governments. And communist governments were clearly in the lead. So again, I have to wonder, why the soft spot for communism? And then I want to shift to something that hopefully will show you the hysteria that is so prevalent right now among Idaho media. This is responding to the Statesman's two-part report on how Idaho is becoming a haven for extremists. So here's the headline: Idaho resurfaces for a new generation as a Western refuge of the radical right. I guess we can all just clutch our pearls now and think about what that means. So let's walk through this, and then I'm going to tie this back into the left's soft spot for communism versus their absolute just intolerance towards anything that is even remotely freedom related, and how they try to tie it into, white supremacy, white nationalism, horrible, violent things, without actually having the burden of proof of tying those things together. So from the article from the Spokesman, this was in Spokane, July 29th of this year, Idaho may be going in a more ominous direction. Counterterrorism experts and U.S. officials are watching the evolution of extremism in Idaho with alarm. What do you suppose they mean by extremism? There's not a lot of explanation here as to what that means. It's a very loose, ambiguous term, and I guess you and I are supposed to fill in our emotional associations of what that means. We all know it's something bad, right? But they never bother to explain what that means. As the state has won hard-fought victories against entrenched but isolated extremist groups, becomes a refuge for a broader range of far-right ideologies. Now, again, let's talk about what those ideologies are. I mean, if we can get some definitions on the table here and at least know that we're talking about the same thing, that would be one thing. But too much of this is just like free association. What does it mean? What do you think of when I say far right? How about when I say hard right? So Josh Hurwitz, U.S. Attorney for the District of Idaho, says we're looking at a resurgence in this type of activity, whether it be, and watch how he ties all these together, white nationalism, white supremacy, anti-government rhetoric, a combination of them all. From a law enforcement perspective, we're using all the tools we have to monitor threats. Okay, anti-government rhetoric. Does this mean the guy who complains to his wife about, man, we pay a lot in taxes as he's marching off to the post office on April 15th? Is that anti-government rhetoric? If someone is flying a flag, is that considered anti-government rhetoric? Before you laugh and before oh, come on, don't be ridiculous. Just know that an FBI whistleblower has leaked to Project Veritas some inside documents from the FBI about some of the things that they're monitoring that would show signs of extremism. And a lot of this is stuff that was just simple, patriotic, the Gadsden flag, a symbol for a resistor, from an electrician's manual. The resistance. But it's so funny that all the concern is only about people who are expressing a preference for freedom, and they're being lumped in with white nationalism, white supremacy, anti-government rhetoric, as if this is all part and parcel of the same thing, when it's clearly not. I'll explain more about that in just a moment. Devin Burghardt, president and executive director of the Institute for Research and Education on Human Rights, says a new generation of extremists is settling in Idaho, which ranks among the top states in the nation for far-right activity. What does that mean? What is far-right activity? I mean, look, if we're gonna throw it out there, maybe we should have a definition. Unless, of course, the idea here is just to throw an unspecified predicate out there and hope that everybody thinks it's something really bad without ever bothering to explain what that is. I mean, look, for some people, being married, having children, going with my family to church each week, eating red meat, driving a diesel pickup or something like that, that could be considered far-right activity. So where's the line? See, I don't think there's supposed to be one. Now, Burghardt said they've now decided to make northern Idaho a home and in essence rekindle some of the same ideas that the Aryan nations had 40 years ago, but instead put it in a much more palatable package to take off the swastika armband and to put on a suit and tie. Now, again, I'd like to see some very clear idea of what exactly are we talking about. Because the Aryan nations was not shy about shaving their heads and tattooing on, the SS lightning bolts and swastikas and so forth. They were very clear about who they were. But we're supposed to believe that, well, if somebody puts on a suit and tie, goes out there running around like Ammon Bundy or Eric Parker or, anybody else who's running for office, oh, that must mean they stand for the same things. Prove it. Show me where exactly their beliefs cross over, because I don't think you're going to find it. Besides which, Nazi ideology is based on collectivism. It really is. In fact, it's an especially ugly form of collectivism. And Marxism is also collectivism. So these are ugly cousins, and people like me and you who love individualism and individual rights and liberty, we want nothing to do with either one of them. Now, Rachel Carroll Rivas, lead senior research analyst for the Intelligence Project at the Southern Poverty Law Center, says it is a true mix of the spectrum of the hard right, everything from the more explicitly racist groups involved in white nationalist activity to groups aligning with the anti-government militia movement. Across the country, of course, all those groups exist, but there tends to be a trend line one way or the other. She says Idaho is really a microcosm of what the hard right looks like in the United States. Again, I mean, I hear the words she's saying here, but they're meaningless without some kind of context to describe what exactly is that supposed to look like. The number one reason that I hear from people who have moved to Idaho, as I did within the last year, I returned after a 25-year absence. Number one reason that I hear from people who have said, yeah, I moved here and I'm glad I moved here, it's because they felt that this was an island of freedom in a rising sea of tyranny of one form or another. And particularly people who lived in states that were primarily ruled by left-wing organizations or left-wing administrations. These are the ones that wanted that freedom. Chris makes a great comment here. Anti-government or pro-right-sized government? Exactly. Just because you're not in favor of out-of-control, unlimited government doesn't mean that you're anti-government. Maybe this will surprise you. I think there is such a thing as good government, but it's a whole lot smaller than anything that we have right now. And I think it's important we understand that government gets its power from the people. We don't get our rights from the government. We delegate certain powers to the government. We tell it, you exist for the reason of protecting these rights. And when it slips beyond its boundaries, when it starts doing things without accountability, it can do some pretty harmful things. Can I refer you back to R.J. Rummel's, democide and people who died at the hands of government? So let's get back to the hysteria, the pearl clutching here again from spokesman.com. The targeted use of online content is not something that happens randomly, a senior official said, speaking on the condition of anonymity. Not believing it in enough to put his name on it or her name on it, but, on a condition of anonymity. Let me put some innuendo out here. It's being used in a very sophisticated way by threat actors to exacerbate the polarization and tribal nature of our public discourse, to rip apart those fractures of our society with the intent to sow discord and promote violence. Now, what's really crazy is as I read those words, I immediately think, oh my gosh, I can think of exactly a group that does this. Threat actors who exacerbate the polarization and tribal nature of our public discourse and who go out there intending to sow discord and promote violence. That's Antifa. That's your black bloc little masked troublemakers out there chanting slogans and otherwise, stopping traffic and trying to impose themselves on people and threatening violence on anyone who isn't marching and agreeing with them perfectly. But I don't think about the political right like that. Now, granted, there are people on the political right who hold weird and sometimes even offensive ideas. But as far as violence, no, I'm still remembering what the summer of 2020 was like and the riots that were taking place coast to coast after the death of George Floyd. And I'm sorry, but that was not right-wing in its origin. So why the focus here on, hard right, far right, rah, violence? Now, this official, anonymously, says there certainly seems to be an increased level of online activity from groups of people coalescing around anti-government ideological beliefs. You mean like proper-sized government or proper limits on government or higher moral authority than government, like our rights come from God? That kind of anti-government belief? And listen to this. Here we start the litany of conspiracy theories. They believe in conspiracy theories about the election, conspiracy theories about COVID-19, conspiracy theories about immigration. Oh, conspiracy theories. Nothing to see there. Look away, citizen. There's nothing to see. Those are issues that have tended to resonate in certain parts of the country for generations. Oh, yes. We used to, talk about this in my granddad's day, COVID-19. Absolutely. Election fraud? Oh, it was a conspiracy theory as far back as, well, actually, it kind of was back in the Kennedy-Nixon race in 1960. But now they're being pumped out on steroids. No, this is a very deliberate attempt to conflate people who are concerned with what they see, namely government slipping off of its leash and beginning to run roughshod. And I don't think you have to use too much imagination to recognize everybody's life sucks a little bit more since the election of 2020, since Biden took office. And it's not that, this is all his fault, but the policies that he and his administration have pursued have been of a punitive nature. Like, we are here to punish half the country that doesn't believe in us. So isn't that rich? Well, this is just conspiracy theories. And there's nothing to see about the election. There's nothing to see about COVID-19. I don't know. People who are paying attention may beg to differ. That doesn't mean everybody has to agree, but if somebody sees government is getting out of control, I think they have a right to speak up and say something. Leading up to the state's primary election in May, this is where we're going to tie it into political leaders who actually aren't part of that establishment that was allowing government to operate beyond its normal moral boundaries. So leading up to the state's primary election in May, Janice McGeehan, Idaho's lieutenant governor, hosted a voter rally in the Boise area, and invited several, say it with me, far-right figures to join. Now, of course, when I hear far-right, okay, I'm thinking, all right, who would that be? Who would that be? Let's see, we got former Fox News commentator Michelle Malkin. Really? I mean, I don't agree with Michelle on everything, but I would definitely not call her far-right. Conservative, perhaps, but I'm not that hung up on labels. Arizona State Senator Wendy Rogers and podcaster Stu Peters. Wow. Yes, these people are so far right that I'm sure, that just strikes fear into the hearts of anybody who knows their names. Really. As armed members of right-wing groups, including the Proud Boys, by the way, is open carry legal? I think it is, right? Crisscrossed the community park, a crowd of roughly 1,000 rally-goers listened intently as the cast of speakers took the stage. Cast of speakers? Really? Because they weren't like legitimate speakers. They were just somebody out of central casting, right? Probably, overall wearing toothless hillbillies or something like that. All right. And listen to this. What an interesting choice of words. They ginned up support for McGeehan. They didn't raise support. They didn't rally for support. They ginned it up, just like grifters do. Ginned it, because that's the only word that we use when we're talking about right-wing political candidates in attendance while promoting conspiracies about COVID-19 and 2020 election fraud. I mean, they are obsessive. The reporters are just absolutely obsessed with it's all a conspiracy theory. It's all a conspiracy theory, which, if I can translate that for you, means do not consider this. Turn away, citizen. This is unapproved information, and it's not something you should be looking at. And then listen to this quote. In some ways, with the Aryan nations, it was a much easier battle. They were a very clear and obvious threat, but they were contained, said Sophie Bjork James, an assistant professor of anthropology at Vanderbilt University. There was one compound, they were very marginal, they were responsible for violence and harassment, and they were widely looked down upon by the majority of Idahoans, including the legislature. By the way, that is absolutely true. But this next part, today there's a much broader part of the population that holds extremist ideas, and they're in local government, they're in state government, they're organizing gun rallies. Okay, now because I'm an active person and I stand for freedom, however and wherever the opportunity is, I run into people who hold these so-called extremist ideas. And you know what? I have yet to see a single white supremacist among them, at least Aryan nations caliber. Now, maybe somebody in their heart thinks unkind thoughts. I don't know. I don't go into their mind, and I don't have a purity test. Well, I can only talk to you if you can answer this question for me correctly. But the people that I see are people who are concerned about the direction that their country is going, that their state is going, even their local government. They are people who don't want to go out there and impose their worldview on everybody else by force. They want to be left alone. That's it. They want others to stay out of their way, take their boot off my neck, and let me live my life. And I will let you do the same. But see, it's the left. It's the left that wants to. They have to control other people in order to feel okay. And if somebody doesn't want to be controlled, then you're an extremist and you're a threat. At least that's the way that I see it. And for the record, just so we're clear, If you expect me to comply just because you voted for communism, you are in for a very rude awakening. I didn't vote for it, I won't vote for it, and I wouldn't support it. But then again, it's a matter of, do you know what you stand for? Do you know what your rights are? People who know their rights are better equipped to claim them, use them, and defend them. That's really what we need. All right, let's bring this home here. As far as the threats facing the United States today, the official said the primary terrorism threat isn't from foreign terrorist networks or enemy states, but get this, individuals and small groups of people willing to carry out acts of violence motivated by extremist ideological beliefs. Wow. Again, the most extremist ideological beliefs and acts of violence that I have seen with my own eyes and with video is Antifa. That's left-wing violence. That is Marxism. So why are we focused on those who disagree with the ones who are pushing left-wing politics? Oh, because these are people who know what their rights are and who are not going to just roll over and say, okay, you told me what to do, I guess I better do it. Now, the article says Idaho, the fastest growing state in the nation, remains as much a draw for these groups as ever. Presumably the extremists. I think it's probably more towards the freedom-oriented people, romantically portrayed by radical networks as a white Christian haven on the old American frontier. Listen to this next quote, though. Tradition matters a lot, Burghardt said. They are drawn to the individualistic nature of the West and constitutional interpretations that were long since left in the past. Oh, really? Wow. You are so sophisticated with that interpretation of yours there, sir. Yeah, long since left in the past. What kind of interpretations would that be? We talking ones that insist that government doesn't exceed its rightful authority, that doesn't usurp authority that was never given to it in the first place? I mean, what's the point of having a constitution? And frankly, I think this is what it comes down to. They don't want to be bound by it. They certainly don't want people who will insist that they abide by it, they being the people within government. Burghardt says these are the kind of frames they're using to find that new generation. So plenty of outrage, plenty of harumph against people who stand up for freedom. So why the soft spot for communism? Here's the answer that Dr. Walter Williams had. Why are leftists soft on communism? Well, the reason leftists give communists, the world's most horrible murderers, a pass is that they sympathize with the chief goal of communism, that is, restricting personal liberty. In the U.S., the call is for government control over our lives through regulations and taxation. Unfortunately, it matters little whether the Democrats or Republicans have the political power. The march toward greater government control is unabated. It just happens at a quicker pace with Democrats in charge. So, did I just call everybody a bunch of commies? No, I really didn't. But I'm definitely suggesting that there is a soft spot in the way the media covers those who stand up for freedom versus those who are pushing for less freedom and more authoritarian or centralized control of everybody's lives. And I think it's only wise that we, recognize that for what it is. I don't encourage people to go around living their lives being enemy-driven. That's something that you'll see a lot of today. It's on the right as well as the left. It's not a happy or productive way to live your life. But if you're going to be recognizing the people who pose the biggest threat to you, your well-being, and your liberties, probably best to have a little diagram here that illustrates what that best looks like. This is the typical view here on the left, which shows the enemy. Unfortunately, this is the wrong enemy. The enemy is the rich. The enemy is anybody who has more than I do, who has more opportunity, and everybody else is the non-rich, and it's the people who have, means. I mean, does this not sound like Marxism, right? Those bourgeois individuals, why they're keeping us proletariats down, and we've got to find a way to throw this off and otherwise, reclaim our rightful place, with equality. And yeah, that's the distorted view. Now, this view on the right, this is a better way to assess who is a threat to you and your freedom. You can see that there are rich as well as non-rich people who allow other people to live in peace. And then you have people who use government to control you. Again, at the risk of sounding enemy-driven in my thinking, that's where the real enemy is. It's the people who would deny freedom to everybody because they believe that somehow it's their prerogative to tell other people how to live their lives. The people who are currently being maligned as extremists, for the most part, the vast majority of them are simply people who are freedom-oriented, who wish to be left alone to pursue their lives and pursue their happiness and not bother other people. So why do we have to demonize them as extremists? I guess because otherwise they look too normal. People would just relate to them. People might see him in that suit and tie and think, oh, this seems like a pretty normal guy. Yeah, I might sit down and, have some ribs or drink a beer with him. Beware. Demonization is an ugly thing, and it's going on full bore right now. And sadly, I think that it comes down to the people who think that I'm a better person if I'm controlling other people. That's not what makes you a better person. You want to be a better person? Try living your life as a person who is actually decent and good in what you do. I know that's asking a lot, but that's the way that a good person lives. It's not about virtue signaling. It's about actually taking the time to be a decent person. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing politics.